hello to you, and welcome to the Richard Nichols Podcast, the personal development podcast series that's here to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to be the best you can be. I'm psychotherapist Richard Nichols, and today's is a bonus episode. It's an interview with Dean Burnett. And if you're ready, we'll start the show. Hey people, it's me again. As previously explained, the lockdown meant a few people I know and love who wouldn't normally be available were twiddling their thumbs for a couple of hours and were happy to pop onto here and share some wisdom and insight. And today it's the turn of neuroscientist, stand-up comedian and author Dean Burnett. Dean's been in the public eye for a number of years now. He's appeared on many TV shows talking about science and psychology over the years. He's a funny and lovely man and very clever with it. Even though his first book, because he's got loads, was called The Idiot Brain. And I highly recommend that book. I genuinely do. If you liked my book, you'll really like his as well. He's got a similar writing style to me. He's got a way of explaining very complicated things in a really understandable way. I love him to bits. I recorded this one a bit more recently than the other bonus episodes that I did in the summer. And although I think I managed to clean everything up in post-production, it was chucking it down with rain at Dean's End in Cardiff. It really was. It certainly doesn't spoil anything though. So I'll let you listen to our little chat and I'll speak to you later. Hello there, Dean. Welcome aboard.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's not the nicest day though, but...
No. It's worth mentioning that if you follow Dean on Instagram at all, you'll probably see his little writing cabin that he works in, and he posts images of a lovely writing cabin, lovely writing environment. It must be nice to be able to take yourself away from everybody and sit and think and write and so on.
Sound trap.
But in the winter...
Bit of a sound trap for heavy rain, which is what we have today. So if there's any background rattling, it's either the heavy rain or my notorious cat just harassing something on the roof, which is a very common...
famous Pickle.
Yes, that guy, yes.
That cat.
He's made this whole cabin less relaxing. But the favourite one was when we just got him. I was sat, it was a summertime, like a nice summer, it was like a late September balmy evening, one of those lucky ones you get sometime, and I was just sat here, like it was night time, I had everyone was in bed, I thought, it's lovely good writing time. And there was like some, just typing away in my garden, and then this almighty thud and crash and noise, and it was Pickle jumping at the moths flapping against my window. So that was far less soothing than I was led to believe would be the case. So yes, cats are annoying, as we know.
So for those of you who don't know Dean Burnett, Dean is a neuroscientist. Mm-hmm. He's an author. He's written quite a number of very, very successful books, and if it's not too sycophantic, I don't mind saying that I'm quite glad that I wrote my book 15 Minutes to Happiness before I read your Idiot Brain, because if I'd have read your book first, I'd have probably thought to myself, well, there's no point in writing another book about how the brain works and how to be happy and so on, because you've already done it, and it's brilliant. It really, really is.
Thank you. Yeah.
So for listeners of my podcast who already like my work, have already read my book and liked it, I definitely recommend you look into Dean's work as well, because if you like my style, you'll really like his as well, definitely.
Thank you.
Now, the reason I contacted you, Dean, a couple of months ago to come onto my podcast and share your wisdom was because I heard an interview with you on Radio 4. I don't know whether you remember that a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. That asked you on to talk about the positives and negatives of being positive.
Oh, yes.
That sort of keep calm and carry on attitude.
It was the live, love, laugh. I can't remember the order they go in, but it was about that particular. Well, I thought it was just that they were using it as a generic sort of term for that sort of stuff. Like the feel good memorabilia, the positive memes, and the keep calm and carry on merchandise. And I thought they were wanting to talk about that sort of thing, and like what are the pros and cons of it. But it turns out that they actually had what they wanted to do was talk about that particular line of products, because they had the man behind the company which sells them on air. And what it seems like in hindsight, they wanted me to come along and sort of validate the use of it in a sort of, well, let's say commercially useful way, in that I should be there and say, Well, yes, of course, this is helpful because it reinforces positive thinking, and deep in the brain we have this reward, blah blah blah. But I'm not. I was not told that. I am not. I don't like to provide some commercial content for other people for free, especially when I'm not told about it. So I did interject with a lot of stuff about the dangers of toxic positivity. It's all very much along a similar line of just snap out of it, just cheer up, or you can decide to be happy, which is not how it works. So there's an element to it of that, but it's nowhere near that simple. And
if it was that simple, we'd all be able to quite easily simply smile ourselves happy.
Exactly.
And it's really not quite that simple, is it? I know there's been some studies to try and test that, the facial feedback hypothesis, that if you smile, your brain associates that smiling action with feeling happy and activates neurons responsible for it. But when that's been replicated, it's not quite as successful, is it? And that's part of the replication crisis that we're finding in a lot of mental health studies, isn't it?
No. Like you say, like the replication crisis, like that study which showed that if you make people smile, but make them hold a pen with their lips, so they're not actually thinking, I want to smile. They are just doing the same movements without the emotional or the conscious effort to smile, then they become happier. But I say that particular study, the efforts to replicate it haven't gone particularly well. So it could have just been a one-off fluke. Yeah,
I know, and it's a study that I've been quoting for years since it was first published. Absolute shame, because we do want it to be that easy, don't we? Positive mental health. Just put a smile on your face and everything's going to be okay. I think there's definitely a middle ground between trying too hard and not doing anything at all to improve your mood. What I've been suggesting to people recently, which I think, certainly anecdotally anyway, is having a better effect, is what's called a half smile. Or sometimes some therapies refer to it as the Mona Lisa smile. It's more like smiling with the eyes. You just start a smile going, but you don't force it into a great big false grin. It is just a half smile. You start to turn your lips up a little bit, just at the corners, just to turn your mouth up a little bit, and it starts the muscles going around the eyes that says, yeah, I'm in a good place. And maybe that's fed back from other people that are around us.
Totally, yeah.
We just feel I'm showing a better version of myself, but it's not so forced, it's not so fake, so it starts to feel real. And anecdotally, I'm finding that works quite well for people, because people do want tools and techniques. I'm a relational therapist, I guess. I'm an integrative therapist, but I tend to work more on creating a relationship with the clients that helps them to feel safe and valid rather than just tools and techniques.
Yeah.
And sitting with a therapist, whether it's on via a screen or face-to-face in the clinic like it used to be in the old days. Can't wait for 2021. Come on, we'll get back to that one day. However we create that relationship, therapy is there to make people feel safe, and they can learn to like themselves because this person in the room with them is showing that they like them and so on. But clients will say, what do I do now? What do I do in between the sessions? How do I get better by myself? Anyway, speaking of 2021, you've got a busy year coming up by the sound of things, haven't you? Not only have you written, or I think you're still writing it, a book you've got ongoing at the minute, but there's a paperback version of the audio book that you did through Audible. Now, I'd only ever known you from writing before, so how come you got an audio thing? How did that happen?
Well, like last year I had 2 books out, which was
the Teenage Brain one.
Yeah. The one book, physical book with Penguin, Why Your Parents Are Driving You Up the Wall and What to Do About It, which is out last August. And also Psychological, 2 words, very clever, that's what I say every time I say the title, for Audible, which is an audio exclusive. And these weren't planned. I mean, I guess some people will say, like, oh, how do you get your ideas for your books? A lot of the time people will come to me, like the Idiot Brain was my first book, still my most successful book, and it's had the longest out there, so I guess that makes sense. But I had no real plan to write a book. I never thought anyone would want me to write a book. I never thought I'd get the opportunity. When I was younger, I used to say, I'd like to write a book, but in the same sort of vein of, I'd like to go to Mars, I'd like to own a jetpack. Not going to happen, just an idle fantasy. And then the Guardian blog I wrote took off, and then the opportunity came up. So it was just mostly a case of, well, I got one opportunity to write a book. I'll just say all the stuff I want to say in this one book. And as I saw it, we'll put it out there. Maybe some of my blog readers will buy it eventually. Over time, it'll break even, or whatever advance I get. And then we'll all forget about it and go on with our lives. That's how I saw my literary career going. And didn't pan out that way. Actually went a lot better than expected. Here we are. So people come to me with ideas for books and things. And this was the teenage book, Why Your Parents, was an idea someone else had and said, you'd be great to write this. I said, yeah, that is a really good idea. I want to write that. So I did, but I had very short turnaround time. It was like 6 or 7 weeks to write that, which was frantic. And same time, Audible project said they'd like to do some material with me because my audiobook, The Brain, has gone really well for them as well. And I thought, I've always wanted to write a book, which was my insight on mental health, which is not sort of, the vast majority of mental health books out there, and there are many, they are from the perspective of someone who has gone through a mental health problem of their own, whatever it may be, and what they've learned about it, which is as it should be. It should be, quote unquote, patient-facing, or because people who have these experiences, when it comes to books, that's what you want. You want the personal journey, you want the emotional insight and so forth. But I felt I could do that with my science knowledge too, because I've got a sort of very broad spectrum of, I'm a neuroscientist who did work in psychology school and then taught a psychiatry program, so I got feet in many camps. And I thought it'd be good to have some sort of, a primer of, this is how we think mental health works in the brain, to sort of contextualize it, to make it more tangible. Because obviously mental health awareness is such a big campaign, but a lot of the time I find there's no actual information as to why these things are happening, or why depression's occurring, why anxiety is such an issue, and what's going on internally to make it in such a big problem. And I find that usually helps when you're trying to make people take something seriously. So that's what I wanted to do. But like I say, because I've not coming at it from my depression journey, my anxiety journey perspective, publishers are a bit less keen. Audible thought it might be good to have something like that, especially because there is still a stigma attached to mental health. So if you're on a bus or on a commute, reading a book says how mental health works, that's a slightly, it's slightly socially awkward perhaps. But if it's an audiobook, you just see someone with headphones in, people don't know any different. So it was never, I never thought this would be a great audiobook, but the fact is, Audible, the audiobook company, said they wanted to do it. So, well, I guess it'll be an audiobook then. So again, these things aren't really mostly my decision. They just go, okay, that's an opportunity. I'll go with it and see where it takes me.
Wow, and to put your spin on things, that can't be that easy as a neuroscientist, so interested in neurologically what's going on inside somebody's head to contribute to their mental health problems. It's not reductionist as such, but it's quite difficult, I guess, because we call our emotions feelings for a reason, because we feel them in our body. It's not just going on in our brain neurologically. We feel it in our stomach, in our gut. We feel it in our heart rate. We feel it in our fingers, and we feel it in our toes. We get irritable bowel syndrome if we have constant stress over a long period of time, because the gut just shuts off, the gut function stops working. There's lots of different areas of our body that create or at least display our emotions. Is that something you found quite tricky to pick your way through, neurologically?
Very much so. It's in the book I'm working on now. The next book I'll have coming out in February is the print version of Psychological. That wasn't meant to be my next book. That was meant to follow on from the book I'm currently working on. Current working title, which I think I'm stuck with now, is Emotional Ignorance, because it was meant to be a book all about, like you say, about emotions, how they work in the brain. Because I did the idiot brain and the happy brain, and when I did the happy brain, people kept saying, why write about happiness? Why not any other emotion? Which is, I don't think I realised how insulting that was. They said, why don't you write a different book than when you did? Fine, I will. Cheers. And but it got me interested. But the happy brain was more about not so much emotion as why do we react positively to some things and not to others? Like the evolutionary reasons for that, the socio-cognitive processing going on. And it was more about how the brain works rather than how emotions work. And so I thought I'll do one about emotions too. I'll do a chapter about each of the main emotions, fear, anger, happiness, sadness, blah, blah, blah. And then I started looking into it. Oh, this is actually a lot more convoluted and tricky to unpack than I thought, because I thought it was established science. More for me, of course. Nothing is in the brain, but you think I'd learned that by now, but so far, no good. And this is actually a lot more. My idea for this book is actually kind of hard to do. If I'm going to do it my way, then it's going to be very much warping of what the actual reality is. So then we sort of discussed, also the title was going to be The Emotional Brain, but that's really quite bland sounding, it's quite generic, so we tossed ideas around. I thought I would call it emotional intelligence, because it's the intelligent take on emotions.
Yeah, that's how I tend to phrase it.
And then went through the data and thought, I don't understand any of this. I can't call it emotional intelligence is massive hubris. So now we call it emotional ignorance, because I didn't realize how ignorant I was about this before I started.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But because of all this, it took a long time to write. And then COVID happened, and then my father caught it and died, and I've been dealing with that ever since. So now it's about my, it's been weirdly a confluence of occurrences, and that I've got my own emotions to unpack and to sort through in terms of like dealing with grief and isolation at this time. And it's proven to be, if nothing else, it's proven to be a far more effective writing experience for it. And it's also been kind of therapeutic too, because the people are advised, one of the things they say when you're going through grief is to keep a grief diary, to write down your thoughts, write down your feelings, your reactions, and to help unpack them and process them that way. So I was already writing a book about emotions, so it's sort of like I'm doing a grief diary, but one which potentially people can read themselves. And so it's proven to be a kind of a cathartic experience. But yes, because of the many delays and changes, that's coming out in 2022 now. So that's my next two books. Right. So there we go. That's currently the plan.
Emotional intelligence is a phrase I use quite a lot, as I say, in therapy with people, to try and help them to be more in tune with what's going on in their body and in their mind, so that they can learn the difference between anxiety and excitement, or boredom and anger. If all we've got is I feel bad, then there's not much we can do with that. But once you know the stuff that's going on in the background that creates those emotions, then you've got a better chance of doing something with it, whether it's in your behaviour, your thoughts, or just the way you react to everything. But I think it does take some emotional intelligence. At least that's how I phrase it too. But is it true to say that possibly all emotions, if you reduce them down, again, it's that reductionist thing that I'm not a big fan of, but is everything to do with the fight or flight response, anxiety?
You could argue that. I mean, there is a lot of dispute in the emotional field at the moment because of it's such a tricky to pin down subject. I mean, the actual scientific definition of emotion hasn't been established yet. It's still in flux. We do not have a rigorous, widely agreed scientific definition of what an emotion is, because it's so nebulous, so intangible, because it varies so much from person to person. So, we can't even say what they are at the moment. So to say, how they work is even less confirmed. But,
You'll see articles sometimes, not academic articles, not in scientific journals, but in some sort of popular magazine or something, there's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of exaggeration about how the brain works and about how simple it is when it really, really isn't. And they'll say things like, science has identified where in the brain we keep our shame.
Yeah.
Where in the brain we've isolated where anger is. And I'm going to challenge that, because that doesn't sound right.
Totally, yeah. Because that's still like a holdover from the early days of imaging, like the whole idea that the brain is modular. I mean, Professor Chris Chambers, who I work with a lot in Cardiff, he refers to it as the year of Blobology, as in when we first had these brain scanners, you'd put someone in a scanner, make them do something, whatever it may be, and you'd see a blob on the scan where the activity increases. Because, that's the part of the brain for whatever they're doing. So you show someone a carrot, this bit lights up. Oh, that's the carrot center of the brain. You show someone like the beach ball, that's the beach ball center of the brain because of the blobs. And that's not how it works. Obviously, it's just that this particular sensory experience is being processed by these parts of the brain, but what exactly is happening, we don't know. If you see a carrot, are you thinking about vegetables? Are you looking at the colour orange? Are you perceiving, are you remembering Bugs Bunny cartoons? I mean, there's no real way to narrow it down in that respect. But the emotional side of things, for a while, the dominant theory was that there are primary emotions, the basic emotions which are endemic to every human brain that we all share based on the related facial expressions we have. So that would be fear, anger, surprise, disgust, and happiness, of course. But then, of course, then this was a dominant theory for a while because they proved it with remote tribes. They have the same expression, so there must be a fundamental system in the brain. But then over time, this became this body of work, like you say, like the replication crisis, became more and more. The basis of it became more challenged over time because people have different facial expressions, but for example, surprise is an emotion. Does it have a particular emotional quality? It's neither good nor bad. It just is, but it's got its own expression. So you could argue that. Well, no, but then some people argue that contempt should be part of it because a contemptuous facial expression is quite easily recognized. But then it became a lot less specific over time as people started picking apart all these results and data. And now there's sort of two factors of the fundamental basic emotions, that all emotions are hardwired in the brain, they're just expressed differently, and the constructivist approach in that at the most basic level argues that when we experience something emotional, we experience affect. Affect is like the raw material of emotion. Be good or bad, positive or negative affect. So anger and fear, they would have negative affect, whereas happiness, joy, and contentment, positive affect. So the brain produces this affect, and then our more higher systems, how we've developed, then works that into a coherent shape, a coherent experience, which is what we recognize as being an emotion. And there are different arguments for and against this, but it seems to be it's building up steam. And there's the thing of the appraisal theory, in that the argument being if we have all the same basic fundamental emotional systems, we would logically react with the same emotion to the same stimulus. So if we all see one scary thing, we should all experience fear. If we all experience the exact same threat, we should all experience fear or anger. But we don't. People experience very different emotions to the same thing. People love period dramas and get sort of swept up in them and get all tearful at them. I find them unbearably tedious. I can't manage more than 10 minutes of one. They're just I don't care about what rich people did in the old days. That's not something I can emotionally engage with. Or even the more basic level. My sister, when she was younger, loved the smell of petrol. I found it disgusting. So when we pulled in my parents to fill the car up, she would open the window and waft things in, and I would bleh. No, we have the same parents, very similar DNA, the same background, but we react very differently emotionally to the same stimulus, and it's
because the meaning behind it is different for them than for you.
Yeah, well, even then, the meaning behind both it was there is petrol nearby, and that's not really an emotionally charged stimulus, but we still had this deep-seated emotional reaction to it, which was wildly different compared to from mine to hers. So the idea that there are emotions that have reliable set mechanisms in the brain each time is not supported by the bulk of evidence. But it's not to say there isn't any fundamental emotional system. It's just some emotions have been pinned on certain areas, like anger has certain regions, the disgust is normally associated with the insula. The amygdala is obviously the fear, fight or flight part of the brain. But things like happiness and sadness, we haven't located any particular reliably active mechanism when we experience those. If anything, same parts of the brain light up when we experience either happiness or sadness in some studies, which tells you a lot. It says this part of the brain is active. Clearly, we are processing this in different ways in the circumstances. So the actual mechanisms of emotion are far more nebulous and confusing than textbook science would allow for at the moment. So it's still very much a work in progress.
So we're a long way off trying to treat something as severe as maybe PTSD by isolating the neurons responsible for that memory activation and being able to disable them. That's a long way in the future then.
Yeah, but they are doing there are some interesting therapies about that. In that graduated exposure therapy is still like one of the gold standards for PTSD. So presenting the patient with something which triggers the memory of the trauma, but in a very mild, innocuous way, which doesn't activate fight or flight response or activate the intense fear response. It's how they deal with a lot of phobias. Graduated exposure therapy, just gradually expose them to the thing which scares them, but only in small doses, incrementally, so the brain's mechanism for overreacting to it doesn't get triggered. But yeah, the idea of going into the brain and finding this neuron is responsible for this, let's turn that off or let's reconnect it there. That is some way off, yes, despite what Elon Musk might say.
Oh, yes, yeah, because that's his new thing, isn't it, about trying to hack the brain. I remember him saying something, I think it was just a Twitter thing, probably was, about how his research seemed to suggest that the brain is actually quite simple and stupid. It's the technology that's the complicated thing. And I'm going to dispute that.
I would dispute that. I mean, I've written a book about how stupid the brain is, and even I would still dispute that. So yeah.
I guess what that shows is it doesn't really matter how academic you are, how smart you get. If you're not careful, you can still fall foul of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you don't know what you don't know.
Yes, yeah.
But a little bit of knowledge makes you think that you know more than you actually do.
Yeah. Indeed, yes. The whole idea of, you need a certain level of intelligence to recognise that you're not intelligent. And some people lack that certain level, so they have no reason to doubt themselves, and it becomes a self-sustaining thing.
Fascinating, isn't it? One thing I should have asked you when I contacted you, so I could prime you for this question, actually, thinking about it, is do you have a favourite study or experiment that's been done over the last 50, even 100 years? Is there anything that jumps out at you as being something to spread the word about?
Yeah, I think my favourite one, again, I'm very bad with names, I've referenced it so many times, but a study from University of Bristol about how memory and appetite interact. It's in my book, the one whereby they just fed subjects bowls of soup.
Oh, yes. Love those.
That's my favourite one. Like, for those who aren't familiar with it, certain groups of subjects, one was given a small bowl of soup, one was given a large bowl of soup, and they were asked when they felt hungry again. So, as you'd expect, people who had a small bowl felt hungry sooner than those who had a large bowl of soup because they'd eaten more food. Except in some cases, thanks to an ingenious setup of pipes and pumps and soup vats, those who had a large bowl of soup, it was being slowly drained from the bottom. So they actually had the equivalent of a small bowl of soup, and some people had a small bowl, it was slowly being pumped in from the bottom. So they actually ate the equivalent of a large bowl of soup. But it did show that the actual results suggested more that what they remembered eating than what they actually ate was a bigger influence on how soon they felt hungry and how their appetite worked, which shows that the brain has a much bigger say over our food intake than you'd expect. You think it's all the stomach digestive system, but it's not. I mean, it harkens back to the many tales I've heard about people on memory wards, people amnesiacs who have no ability to form new memories. They tend to gain weight quite easily because even if they've just eaten, they can't.
Well, they don't remember that they've eaten.
Yeah, even if it was 5 minutes before, even if the food is still sat in their stomach, a physical presence, they don't remember eating it, and therefore they are hungry again. So, yeah, the brain has a much bigger say over what we eat than the stomach does.
Yeah, and that's actually a study that's been replicated quite a few times that has survived the replication crisis, because in different ways.
Yeah, in various guises, yeah.
Yeah, but that's been done many times.
I think it reflects on my personality that it's my personal favourite science experiment is all about soup-based deception, which I think is that's pretty much my brand, I suppose.
Soup-based deception. There's the title for a good book. That can be another one for it. That can be 2023. So you've got 2021 and 2022. You're going to be busy. You've got a lot coming up.
Well, I've got a book out in each year at the moment, so it's nice to have work coming down the pipeline. They're both meant to be out next year, because Psychological is meant to be sort of like a bonus book in next October. The Emotional Ignorance is meant to be my book out in February, but we rejigged that around. But yeah, we can at present it's kind of hard to tell what I'll be doing at any point, because we don't know any sort of schedule yet. Because normally when a book comes out, I do the media rounds, or they send down to London, or do the book festivals and stuff. But is that going to happen by February 2021? Who knows? There's virtual things you can do, but that involves less leaving the house, which is nice for me. And Yeah, so, it depends on how well it goes. It could be a case of, the book comes out, people go, oh, well, that's nice, and then ignore it because something else happens. I mean, I've had a few books out, released in America since the first book was out and did quite well over there. But in the interim, a certain man was made president, and a lot of books in America, I was told now, that aren't about Trump. That whole book market is kind of depressed because people only want to buy books about Trump at the moment, pros or cons, and it's like, surely you have enough of the guy when on a day-to-day, surely you want some sort of escape, but apparently not. No, non-fiction at least, they want Trump books and nothing else. So
wow,
so it's a strange time to be an international publisher.
Well, I mean, it's not a surprise, is it? Because he is displaying some interesting traits, some unusual behaviours.
Yeah.
Lately, he absolutely is. I get asked on a regular basis, regular meaning probably once a week, somebody will ask me. Not that it's up to me to diagnose anything anyway. I'm a therapist. Therapists don't diagnose. We just pick up the pieces after somebody's had a diagnosis. But people will say to me, does Donald Trump have narcissistic personality disorder?
Yeah.
And although he's not handling loss or rejection or any sort of damage to his ego very well at all, it's possible he does. I mean, it's quite likely that he does. He certainly has narcissistic personality disorder traits, but I wouldn't say he can be that far up the spectrum if he's had any success in his life at all. People on the extremes of narcissistic personality disorder, they just can't sustain relationships with anybody at all. They push every single person away, and their entire life is a train wreck. It really, really is. And he still has people around him that have supported him throughout his life. He hasn't pushed everybody away. So who knows? Sometimes these labels don't really serve a particularly good purpose, but I guess we need to put people in a box sometimes, even if it's just to arrange insurance payments. Not that we have too much of that problem over here in the UK, because we don't necessarily need those labels for somebody, whereas in the States they absolutely do, and those labels are necessary in order for somebody to even have therapy, which is a real shame. But in being given this label, whatever it is, whether it's having anxiety or depression or a personality disorder, it can help people because it gives them something to accept about themselves, even if they don't like it.
Precisely, yeah.
There is some benefit, I think, in accepting this is who I am. This is what is going on with me, and now I can move forward. Without that acceptance of it, without that understanding of it, we can get a bit stuck, and we can be stuck for decades. But when we get diagnosed maybe with anxiety or depression even, that diagnosis is helpful. And then moving on, we need to accept, I have this issue, I have this problem, and in order to get better, I need to admit that. And I know it sounds counterintuitive that in order to maybe overcome anxiety, you've got to be okay with your anxiety. You've got to be able to accept, this is what I have, this is what's going on with me in order to move forward. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, like, one of the things I have uncovered a lot in my current research is that, when it comes to emotional processing, you say about emotional intelligence, emotional competence, wherever you describe it, it's how good the brain is at dealing with and processing and working through an emotional experience, of which most experiences are emotional in some way, even if it's just very mild. But the brain does that. The brain processes emotions by essentially re-experiencing them, like replaying them and unpicking them and putting them back into some sort of coherent order. And that's a big part of what dreams are, is believed to be a way to process emotional memories. They become like detached from the existing memory and then linked up with something less traumatizing or less stimulating or less less specific. So it becomes a part of your wider brain network, and hence, like, you have, if you're feeling stressed, you'll have a stressful dream. It'll be about something not from work. It'll be like, the classic is teeth falling out. That's something people constantly worry about, but that's a stressful experience. But it's a constant concern. Like, we brush our teeth every day. We're constantly told to look after them. So you have a lot in your head about teeth and losing them, and they're a big part of your general body awareness. So there's that as well. And the brain deals with emotions by engaging with them. Hence, things like sad music can be very helpful in that if you have feelings of sadness in your head, in your memories, or if you're just currently feeling it now, you listen to sad music. It makes you sad, but in a controlled way, in a safe way, in a sort of an empathetic way, like someone else is singing a sad song, you think, I feel like that, they feel like that, I feel validated by this, I feel like someone else gets what I'm going through, like humans are so social that someone else experiences what we're experiencing, such a beneficial thing for us. It makes us feel better knowing that's a thing. So like sad music, or even angry music, like heavy metal, people say it's very therapeutic, very calming in the end, because it allows your brain to engage with that particular emotion, which you might be struggling with, which might have backed up. It allows you to engage with it in safe, controlled ways. It's almost like nicotine gum for smoking. As in, it's not as bad as smoking, but it's got the nicotine, so it keeps you involved. But you're not trying to give up the emotions; you're trying to work through them. And so re-experiencing something which helps your brain deal with it, and therefore, if you deny that you have depression, or you try and suppress it, or anxiety, that sort of holds up the process. It makes it less fluid. It makes it less rapid. It stops it from happening as well as it should, and that just prolongs the whole problem, and it becomes, it builds up over time. So yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I guess it comes down to being congruent. If you are feeling in a particular way, trying to pretend that you're not isn't going to make you feel any better. If anything, it makes people feel fake and false, and can even make people feel worse. If you're feeling sad, listening to happy music, on the whole, isn't going to make you happy. There might be the occasional exception, of course. If you've got some memories that are positive associated with a piece of music, then yeah, but actually that music could be sad, and you could have a positive memory associated to it. If you're feeling a particular feeling, I think there is some benefits in accepting that that's how I feel. And if you're feeling sad, listening to sad music means that the surroundings match how you feel, and it gives you some sort of control over that. That reminds me of one of my favourite studies, although I've got lots. I love all of them. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to these sorts of research papers. One experiment I was looking at the other week was one about congruence, and it was about the negatives of positive mantras, a little bit like what you were saying earlier on with the live, love, laugh thing and the whole keep calm and carry on stuff. Mantras don't tend to work if they don't match what's going on in your body. If your body's on fire, emotionally, all you've got is anxiety. To try and tell yourself, I am calm, it doesn't make you calm. Yeah. If anything, it makes you more anxious because it's so incongruent. And my favourite one is the study where they got people to sing in front of an audience, and everybody was nervous, of course there was. But some people were given the mantra beforehand of saying, I am calm, I am calm, I am calm. And then they measured, how their pitch was in their voice to see how well they performed, and gave them, little questionnaires afterwards about how they felt and so on. And other people were asked to say to themselves, the mantra was, I am excited about this. And those people performed better. They actually enjoyed the performance more, they got better pitch on their voice, they sang better because they didn't tell themselves that they were calm. So there's definitely some benefit in accepting this is how I feel. Even if it is going to be about depression, it needs to be accepted, and the rest of the world needs to catch up and go, okay, that person feels depressed, and what are we going to do about it? Do we sit with them? Do we help them? Do we talk to them? Do we give them advice? What do they need? I mean, the stigma about depression and mental health, mental illnesses, and everything that goes in between, it's starting to raise. The stigma's disappearing away and the positives are improving, I think, unless I'm being naive. Is it better nowadays than it was?
I think it is lifting. I think that the stigma has been challenged and there is progress being made, definitely, because even when I started writing about this area or getting even vaguely involved or interested, say back in the mid-2000s, it was still like, you still got claims in the mainstream and in articles saying like depression isn't real. It's not a thing. It's just people attention seeking. I mean, you still get that from the Piers Morgans of the world and stuff, but it's, they'll say anything to get some attention. So, but that's, we general people as well, like people saying, oh, it's not such a thing, just snap out of it. Whereas now the main argument seems to be that antidepressants don't work. They aren't a real thing. It's just it's a con. So as unhelpful as that is, it's a step in the right direction. At least you're accepting that, at least accept that depression's a real thing. It's like people say, well, I'm not racist. I mean, you are being racist, but at least denying that you're racist, at least accepting racism as bad is now the default norm. That is at least something. We need far more than that. It's a long way to go, but it's still, at least that is accepted thing of racism isn't a good thing, So, but yeah, so there is work in that direction. But like you say, it can manifest now in other ways which aren't necessarily as helpful. Like I've written articles about it, but I've heard some people complain about mental health awareness now means it's entered the vocabulary a lot, as in, but it shouldn't. People say like, oh, I'm just a little bit OCD. You're not. You like things neat and you're pedantic. Those aren't the same things at all. Someone with OCD is struggling with a genuine, real problem, which has a massive impact on their life. They're not just being fussy, or guys who are particularly unpleasant or just I speak my mind. I think I'm on the spectrum. No, that's not how autism works. You are just rude. It's not the same thing at all. It's you can't just claim like, oh, I must be on. No. If people are using it as almost like a get out clause for their own personal unpleasant behaviour, and that's another thing to deal with.
Yeah, I've heard many people say things to me referring to autism, about autistic traits, and they'll say things like, well, we're all a little bit autistic, aren't we? And I think, no, that's not how autism works.
Totally, yeah.
And it's actually quite belittling to people that do struggle when they're on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we can all display autistic traits, I guess. We can all misunderstand social cues, or we can just not get something that other people do. Doesn't mean we're all autistic, though, does it?
Yeah, like my leg's a little bit broken. No. Like I have a little bit of Alzheimer's. No, that's not. You can't say things like. You shouldn't say things like that. People, no doubt, do, and they can, because in free speech, no one's stopping them. But it is like it's such a nebulous area. Like something I've covered in the psychological book is where do we draw the line between mentally well and mentally unwell? So if you got for the physical disorders, it's a lot easier to do because someone's temperature goes up above a certain point. If your blood pressure is up this high, if your legs facing the wrong way, there's a problem. Like that's not meant to be like that. That's clearly let's see what we can do. Or there's a big tumor. If you can detect a virus or a pathogen. Right. That's not meant to be there. That's not meant to be like that. Now we know what the problem is. Let's deal with it. And you don't get that with mental health a lot of the time. Like so, at what point does someone go from being in a low mood to being in a depressed state? There are criterion for that, as in the DSM and ICD-10. You have to have like a low, persistent, low, unchanged negative mood for about 2 weeks, and other signs as well. So there's a cutoff point. But even then, like say with depression, there are like 9 criteria for diagnosis of depression in the DSM or the ICD, or whichever country you're in. And you have to have 5 of those to warrant a diagnosis, which is fine. But that means you could have 2 people with depression who have, like, someone has criteria 1 to 5, someone's 5 to 9. They have one feature in common. They have exactly the same diagnosis. And that's like, well, they would receive the same treatment, the same interventions. And that's a problem. It's like, how do we work around that? But, so much of what we recognize as mentally unwell or mental health disorders is based on like social norms or social parameters. And if I were to say, I talk to an invisible green alien called Zod who follows me around everywhere and helps me out, you would think I have something going wrong. No, that's not right. Let's call Dean's family. He clearly needs some sort of help. But if instead of Zod I said God, like an invisible entity which controls the universe, no, he's just religious. That's fine. You can do it all the time. Do it long enough, they'll invite you to live in the Vatican and give you a nice big hat. And that's not, it's not a disorder. It's part of life. Even though objectively you look at it, it's very similar behaviour. And it's stuff like that. Like especially when it comes to legal stuff too. Like for a long time, a diagnosis of addiction had the criteria engaging in illegal activities.
Oh, illegal.
But that's been dropped because obviously that stigmatizes addicts, and it's mainly stigmatized, but also it's because laws can change. So like say,
Well, gambling isn't illegal.
Precisely, yeah. And that's, gambling is now recognized as an addiction because it's not a drug. So that was another thing as well. Then can you be addicted to a behavior officially?
Yes.
Yes, you can, it turns out. But can you be addicted to, like people, I keep getting asked now about social media addiction or internet addiction. But that's, internet addiction is such a daft term in that the internet isn't one thing. It's like, to me, like say, if you're online doing online gambling, and you're constantly doing that, you've got a gambling addiction or an internet addiction. Because you don't go to a casino all the time. They don't say you've got to build an addiction. It's like the internet is an avenue like that.
From a neuroscientist's perspective, does all addiction, if you play with it and go down to the foundations, is it all just about the pleasure, the relief that might come from repetitive stuff, the reward pathways being overly activated?
Generally, yes. The main thrust of addiction is that the reward pathway in the brain gets overused in ways that it arguably shouldn't be. I mean, it's a lot more clear-cut with drugs because you're introducing a foreign substance into the workings of your brain. And it emphasizes and enhances the reward system way beyond what normally would be, because we have the reward pathway in the brain deep in the center, nucleus accumbens links the ventral tegmental area. That's the part of your brain which assesses what's going on, what's happening to you right now, whether it's good or not, and warrants a reward, the raw feeling of pleasure of any sort. It can be something very mundane. It can be like a nice tangerine, or just finishing an assignment a few hours early, getting it in. Like that can give you a sense of pleasure. Like as the brain goes, right, that's a good thing that's happened. Here, you have this, encourage that sort of thing.
Yeah. That was good. Do it again.
Yes, exactly. That's basically what it boils down to. The brain saying, right, that was good. We want to encourage that. Make sure you keep that in the back on the back burner for future eventualities. But something like a particularly strong drug like an opiate, like heroin, takes that pleasurable feeling and just ramps it way up because it interacts with the reward pathway in so many. You go through all the different brain systems that normally filter out, saying is this warranted, is this required, and stuff, and it sort of accelerates it. It turns up to 11. And then you experience this intense pleasure for no discernible reason. But then your brain adapts to that. So, okay, that happened just now. That was new, because the brain's plastic. It's very flexible. It changed itself to warrant the situation. Because, okay, that was an overwhelming pleasure sensation. So I'll have to change. I'll have to sort of adapt to it. I'll expect a stronger sensation now. And the rest of the brain, which keeps it in check, increases to cancel it out. So you need more drug to get the same rush, the same high, until it gets to the point where you just need the regular drug to maintain normal functioning, because the rest of the brain is adapted to get used to this. And that's why, cold turkey can be so dangerous, so damaging, because you're not taking away the pleasure. You are reducing the normal function of the brain. Because, most long-term addicts take the drug to feel normal, not to feel good. And then you've got this whole imbalanced brain, which is like because the reward system, it cancels out pain and stress. So the parts which process that are now much stronger. So an addict who's gone cold turkey is suddenly far, far more sensitive to pain, far more sensitive to unpleasant sensations. Like they can't even function. So it's a big deal. And but at the baseline, that's what's happening in the brain. And that's why I've written about it, but I get quite annoyed by the whole thing of constant media articles like, cheese activates the same part of the brain as hard drugs, or like winning a computer game activates the same part of the brain as hard drugs. Yes, but it's like you put money in the bank. That's the same place that bank robbers go. Yes, I know, but that's sort of that's how it works. It's not the drug center of the brain. Just that the drugs work on this part of the brain, which does this, and it's a very misleading way of looking at things, and it doesn't help anyone. Is my personal view of the matter.
So, Dean, before we go, what do you think we've got lined up for the future? What's the future of mental health treatment?
I think it's going to be a big deal for the next several years or so, I think, especially because now we've all are going through a pandemic, and the mental health fallout from that is going to be, it's going to manifest in many different ways for a long time now. And I think mental health care is going to be a much bigger issue than it is already. And hopefully that'll mean we can't just put it off anymore. Like, and keep it funded on a shoestring or with the bare minimum. There's going to be a lot more needed to take account of all that. So hopefully we'll see an increase in just general appreciation and acknowledgement and support of mental health care as it is. But the technological side of things is quite interesting. There are quite a few interesting and potentially useful interventions coming on the line, which can happen remotely. Like they are still working on sort of therapeutic software, which you could engage with like over Skype or something, and it gives it's almost like a Turing test thing. It's sort of like a virtual therapist which can respond to your questions and give you proper advice based on what you're saying. Again, I'm not sure how effective that will be because we are human beings. We, if we know we're not talking to a human, we don't tend to engage. Same as when, like a classic example of you're at a railway station and the recorded voice says, "The train to London is delayed by approximately 18 minutes. I am extremely sorry for the delay." No, you're not. You're a machine. You don't care either way. Stop trying to fob us off with robot voices. Like you're finally a human being. We tend to react very negatively when trying to be told what to do by machines. So I think there's a certain limit to that. But hopefully virtual software can make it, especially now with the sudden boom in conferencing software and remote communications. People can have therapy in their own home, which would be really nice for a big part of a lot of mental health issues is leaving the house. You don't have to, and you hopefully get some sort of progress ahead of time rather than having to muster up the courage and the confidence to just get out there in the first place, which you won't need to do if it's remote. And there's lots of software is becoming a big part of it. Like there's software to record and assess as patients' contribution to a therapy session. And they've done a few algorithms now which can find certain words which prop up, which can suggest that they are going to disengage with the therapy, or to say, well, this patient's not doing, even though they give the presentation of engaging, the words they're using and the tone they're using suggest that they are finding it hard. So you can adjust your therapy that way, or like avatar therapy, where people they don't make them watch a James Cameron film, which is really overlong and pointless. It's sort of like you get a virtual avatar and you sign your condition to that avatar, so it becomes a representation of the problems you're dealing with, and that sort of contextualizes it and gives it a tangible presence, which allows people to tackle it better. So, combination, I think we hopefully will see a notable expansion of mental health care facilities, interventions, techniques and methods available, and a lot of these will be more technologically sophisticated than they are now. So, hopefully, that's where we're going. I can't see a reason why it wouldn't happen, but yes, that's my guess.
Excellent. Then I shall remain optimistic.
Yes, hard to do in 2020, but let's try.
It's a lot harder in 2020 to be optimistic, but I'm getting there. Don't know about you. We're all getting there. There's a vaccine literally in the post, isn't there?
Yes.
So, Dean, if anybody wants to hear more from you, where do they find you?
You can just go to my website, deanburnett.com. The first one to ever want to copyright that name, apparently, so that's nice. And that's why I don't update it as much as I like, because it's a website and it takes a lot of work. But usually my Twitter feed is a place to go, at Garrowboy, Garwboy. Garrow Valley is where I was born and raised, in South Wales. Had I known anyone would care who I would have picked a different Twitter name. But by the time I realised that was a problem, far too late to do anything about it. So yes, that's probably where you'll find my stuff. And I have my own professional Facebook page, Dean Burnett Right In Person. So I think author I don't know, I still don't quite accept the fact that that's what I am now. But even though the evidence is there.
Oh, you're an author, Dean. You've authored many, many things.
I know, but it's easy for me to make light of it.
Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, Richard.
Thanks ever so much for being here today.
No problem at all. Thanks a lot.
So that's Dean Burnett, and I highly recommend you look into his books, The Idiot Brain, The Happy Brain, Why Your Parents Are Driving You Up the Wall and What to Do About It, if you've got teenagers in the house, and his new Psychological is already available through Audible. They wouldn't let him narrate it though, not that he minded, and Audible did at least use a Welsh voice actor for it, which is lovely. And as he said, the physical version of it is going to be out next year if you prefer that. I'll add some links into the show notes with some info about him, and I'll love you and leave you for another week or so, but there'll be another bonus episode before Christmas, which is going to be, put my teeth back in, which is going to be my chat with yet another balding middle-aged white guy, Radio 4 favourite Robin Ince. So, I'll love you and leave you. You know where I am if you need anything, and I'll be back before you know it. Take care.